All right, so there's been a huge shakeup in federal law enforcement up in Minnesota, and it all centers around this one commander and his, well, let's call it a controversial exit. So today, we're going to unpack exactly who's leaving, who's stepping in to take his place, and what this all really means for a community that's already on edge.
So here's the headline. The federal commander who's been right at the center of all the recent tensions in Minnesota, he's out. He's leaving. And for a community that has been on edge for what feels like forever, this is a really big deal.
But that immediately brings up the million-dollar question, right? Is this actually a real change in strategy, or are we just swapping out one controversial leader for another? Let's get into it.
So how do we know this is for real? Well, the news first broke in the Wall Street Journal, and they were citing multiple administration officials. So yeah, this isn't just some rumor floating around. It's a confirmed move. Commander Bovino and at least some of his agents are packing their bags.
Okay, so to really get why his departure is such a massive deal, we've got to take a step back and look at who Commander Bovino actually is, and more importantly, how he became such a flashpoint in the first place. See, Bovino wasn't some desk jockey hiding in an office. No way. He was the public face of this entire operation, and he was often right there in the field with his agents. And here's the really critical part. He was leading Border Patrol agents, guys who are trained to deal with cartels and traffickers on the border, and putting them right in the middle of an American city. You could imagine that created some serious friction. And that friction, well, it eventually landed him in court. A judge actually issued an injunction against him, flat out ruling that his tactics were unconstitutional. Now, it's true, a different judge later put that order on hold, but man, that initial ruling, that was a powerful, powerful condemnation of how he was doing things.
And this is where it gets even crazier. This really gets to the heart of the whole issue. Even after a judge had called his tactics unconstitutional, Bovino himself was reportedly seen personally throwing a chemical irritant canister into a crowd. I mean, that just speaks volumes about his leadership style, right? Hands-on, super aggressive, and, at least according to his critics, completely and totally out of bounds.
So, you can imagine the reaction when people heard he was leaving, right? For a lot of folks, it was probably a huge sigh of relief. But is it really that simple? Is this the good news it seems to be?
If you look at the timeline, the judge's injunction was definitely the first major red flag. But the real turning point seems to be after the fatal shooting of a man named Alex Preddy by a Border Patrol agent. It was after that tragic event that the administration signaled it was going to wind down some of these operations, and that's what ultimately led to Bovino's departure.
So yeah, for a lot of people on the ground, this news felt like a genuinely positive development, a step in the right direction. But just when you think you know where the story is going, it takes a sharp turn and gets a whole lot more complicated.
Why? Because the administration has already announced who's coming in to take over. And that person is Tom Homan, the president's border czar. He's basically the administration's top guy on border enforcement. And listen, if you thought Commander Bovino was controversial, oh boy, you're going to want to stick around for this next part.
When you put these two guys side by side, they look kind of similar on paper. They're both high profile. They both like being out in the field with their agents. But there are some key differences. While Bovino was being accused of unconstitutional tactics, Homan is known for his, let's say, pugilistic rhetoric. And yeah, he's also been the subject of a pretty major investigation himself.
And when we talk about his rhetoric, I mean, it is incredibly stark. Just to give you an idea, in a past interview where he was talking about ICE activity, he was quoted as saying, and this is a direct quote, "People will die." I mean, let that sink in. It's a statement that shows an extremely hardline approach, and it's something that has followed him throughout his entire career.
So, remember that investigation I just mentioned? Well, according to reports, it's centered on a bag of cash, a bag with $50,000 in it. Now, that Department of Justice investigation was reportedly called off after the administration changed, but it's still a pretty significant part of his public record, you know?
So, all of this leaves us with the new leader, but a whole lot of the same old questions. Maybe even more questions than before. What does this change actually mean for the people of Minnesota on the ground?
I mean, that's the big one, right? Is Homan's arrival going to lead to a real, fundamental shift in tactics? Or is this just window dressing? Putting a new face on the exact same mission?
And here's another huge question. What about cooperation? One of the biggest points of friction with Bovino was the terrible relationship between his federal agents and the local authorities. So will Tom Homan be the guy who can bridge that gap? Or is that friction just going to continue?
You can bet everyone is going to be watching that very, very closely.
And we also have to think about the agents themselves, the ones on the ground. They're working in a really tough, hostile environment where, as the source material points out, they're just not wanted. And in a pressure cooker like that, leadership is absolutely crucial for morale. And morale, well, that has a direct impact on actions.
So it all boils down to this. In a situation that is already so volatile, is Tom Homan, with his history, with his rhetoric, really the right person to de-escalate things? Is he the guy who can bring the kind of sanity and stability that Minnesota so clearly needs right now?
And that really leaves us with the ultimate question, not just for Minnesota, but for any situation like this. When you change the leader, do you actually change the mission? Or is the mission already set in stone, no matter who's calling the shots? That's the huge, critical question that everyone in Minnesota is now facing.